Welcome to week 10 of summer term. As we come to the end of the term, I want to give you an idea to help you how to go about doing field-based research in CMR. In particular, I will talk about identifying a research problem, situating your research problem in an appropriate academic field or discipline, and then I'll also talk about research designing and methods. So let's get started. Identifying a research problem can be a bit difficult, but you will find it easy if you are curious and imaginative. There are countless questions out there looking for answers. You can only find them if you are curious. A curious mind refuses to accept anything as pristine. Imagination is the ability to picture how things behave and what induces behavior without reference to any source. This ability is essential to research designing, as I shall demonstrate later in this presentation. Albert Einstein, for example, made monumental discoveries because he was curious. He challenged the Newtonian theory of gravity that the Earth pulls objects toward itself, a theory that had been normative for 2 centuries. Instead, Albert Einstein proposed that it is warped space which makes objects fall to the Earth. This alternative explanation was proven to be true. It was Einstein's ability to imagine different possibilities which enabled him to use the solar eclipse for his experiment to prove his theory. To come up with a good research problem, it is important to focus on topical debates that are interesting to you and that are also relevant to your field and the society. A research problem that focuses on a topical issue which is also relevant to your field makes it easy to find a professor to work with as your mentor. A research problem that is appealing to you motivates you to keep going even in times of difficulties. Remember that it takes years to complete an advanced degree program, and you don't want to invest in something you are not interested in. Now, let me provide an example of my own research. I come from a social science background with interest in economic development, and I also worked in the development field as a practitioner for 6 years with UNICEF and World Vision International. I am a Christian, and my research focuses on the role of religion in development. Now, you can see here the connection between my background and my research topic. This tells you that I am interested in my topic. Also, it is not surprising that Dr. Brand Myers took me in as his mentee. He is one of the authorities in the field of development studies and was a development practitioner himself for 30 years at World Vision. In addition, ending global poverty is an important United Nations agenda, and the role of religion in development is increasingly becoming attractive to scholars from a wide gamut of disciplinary backgrounds, including missiology and development studies today. Thus, my research topic meets the criteria I have provided. Okay, next, I want to talk about situating your research problem in an appropriate academic field or discipline. You need to be conversant with your discipline in the first place. Review contributions of pioneer theorists and early debates from the historical origins of the discipline all the way to current debates. Pay close attention to how the field developed. And another thing that also requires attention is what questions led to literature growth and how the field branched itself into subdisciplines. Then pick a branch or a subdiscipline that is relevant to your area of interest and reflect on the current debates in that branch. From the current or any important debates, you can pick one which fits with your topic. This is where you will make an original contribution. Your curiosity helps you here to ask important questions about claims in the literature. Then go deeper in your chosen direction by reviewing relevant literature. And what I mean here is peer-reviewed research which has attempted to address your questions. You may come across so many answers to your questions, and if you are not curious enough, you can easily give up and try to pursue a different direction. But that is not an option for a curious mind. So I would urge you to keep asking and keep prying into the literature until you find a lacuna that has never been explored or a lacuna that has never been filled. One way to know that you have done enough literature review is saturation. If you reach a point where the voices you are encountering in the literature are not saying anything different from what you have already reviewed, it is time to sketch your research question. That is moving from a broader research topic to a narrow and specific research question. So as you can see, this diagram actually illustrates a movement from a broader topic, trying to understand how your field emerged, how it got accepted into the academy as a discipline, and different debates that have been taking place and how it has been branching into different subdisciplines up until you locate a relevant branch and the topic that is where that fits with your research topic. And when you do that, you are situating your research in the literature. From there, you pry further into the literature as demonstrated here in the diagram at the bottom until you find a gap that has never been filled, and that becomes the area where you will make your contribution. So just to give an example, in my case, I noticed a burgeoning stream of literature on Pentecostalism and development, claiming that Pentecostalism has a redemptive lift, and their converts are experiencing upward social mobility. My questions were, what do they do? What makes them different from their non-Pentecostal counterparts? Prying further into the literature, I discovered claims that Pentecostals facilitate identity transformation among their converts. Note that most studies in the literature do not use the construct of identity, but rather a wide range of descriptions that are vague, such as revision of the conscience, remaking of the person, rewriting of internalized scripts of low self-worth, transformation of individual subjectivities, reorientation of the person, and creation of positive mindsets. But looking at the change that researchers were referring to, I noticed that From a social psychological perspective, they were actually talking about identity transformation. All those other descriptions seem vague, but identity seems to be a construct that can be described and measured. So I was looking for something concrete that could be tested on the ground, and all the other descriptions that other researchers have used seem to fit with the construct of identity. So my question was, how does the identity of Pentecostal converts influence their businesses? Most research in this area seem to have taken this question for granted. But for me, I felt that I had located my research question here, because when an identity is transformed, how that relates to entrepreneurship hasn't been explored, hasn't been addressed. It seems most scholars take it for granted that as long as the identity is transformed, as long as the positive mindset is created, then that is going to have a positive impact on entrepreneurship. And that's why the Pentecostal converts who are doing businesses are actually flourishing. But there's no proof from field-based research to support such claims. So this became my research question. So as I have illustrated here, I started with mastering my field, locating its historical origins, how it started, and different paradigm shifts within the field, reaching the present day, where attention of scholars is now shifting toward religion, trying to understand the role of religion in development. But then I further narrowed it down to entrepreneurship in the Pentecostal context, and that is where I am doing my research. So when you locate your research question, the next task is to sketch your initial research design. And this is where you need to be imaginative to come up with a feasible way to answer your research question. You need to decide who will be your participants, what are their features, and also you must clearly define them. You must clearly define your research participants and how you are going to recruit them, and that is the sampling method. For me, I decided to involve neo-Pentecostal entrepreneurs who run small firms. But to identify what really makes neo-Pentecostals unique, I included non-Pentecostal entrepreneurs in the same small firm industry, so that I can do a comparative analysis to discover what is really unique among the neo-Pentecostal entrepreneurs. My sampling methods are convenience and snowball. But I'm also, because my research is underway right now, so I'm also using theoretical sampling to make follow-ups for clarity, and also there'll be discriminant sampling that will involve a few number of participants with similar features that I'm interested in when the theory that I'm trying to come up with emerges. And those new participants will be asked the same questions to test the theory, to see, to check rather for consistency. And I broke my research question into 3 sub-problems as demonstrated here in the slide. The first one seeks to compare the present and past entrepreneurial attributes of neo-Pentecostal and non-Pentecostal entrepreneurs to discover whether they had experienced identity transformation. So you can see right there that this is actually coming from the literature. It's embedded within the literature. There are claims in the literature that are not supported. So there's a direct connection which demonstrates that my research is actually situated in the literature. It's not coming from nowhere. It's not coming from the vacuum, but it's actually building on what others have done and trying to make a contribution in that stream of literature on Pentecostal studies and development, which is exponentially growing today. And the proposition for that sub-problem is that there is no difference between the past and the present identities of neo-Pentecostal and non-Pentecostal entrepreneurs. So that is me now challenging the claims that Pentecostalism is a factor which facilitates identity transformation among the Pentecostals, leading to their effectiveness in entrepreneurship. So to address this kind of a sub-problem, I need to challenge it and see if data is going to support my claim or challenge it. So the second sub-problem is to determine what influenced identity transformation if it had occurred. So assuming that identity transformation had occurred from the first sub-problem, then what agent of change facilitated identity transformation? Is it Pentecostalism? We cannot assume that, but we need to find out from the ground. And that is why it is important to also include non-Pentecostal entrepreneurs and see if they also had experienced identity transformation at some point in their business itineraries, so that a comparative analysis can be done to identify what really isolates the neo-Pentecostal entrepreneurs from the others, if there is anything though. So the proposition here is that no change agent had mediated identity transformation. So which means identity transformation did not occur in the first place, and there is no any change agent which mediated that. So that's me, and it's only data which can support me or challenge me. So third, I would like to determine the effect of the identity of neo-Pentecostal entrepreneurs on small firms in comparison with that of their non-Pentecostal counterparts, in order to explain the distinct effect of Pentecostal discipleship on small firms. So, is there anything special about Pentecostal discipleship that impacts on the identities of the Pentecostal entrepreneurs, which subsequently impact positively on their businesses? So that's what this particular sub-problem is trying to address. And the proposition here is that there is no difference between the impacts of the identities of the neo-Pentecostal entrepreneurs and the non-Pentecostal entrepreneurs on their small firms. So if Pentecostalism really contributes something unique, then the data will reveal that. But as far as I am concerned, my argument is that there is no any difference. So the non-Pentecostals and the Pentecostals are all going to have their identities will have similar impacts on their businesses. So there's no any difference in terms of the impacts of their identities as regards to their businesses. Okay, so then when you do that, you need to decide what kind of data would help to address your sub-problems. Ask yourself, how can you get that data? How can you analyze it to make sense? These questions relate to methodology, as you can see, which I am going to talk about next before closing this lesson. Okay, so let's talk about methods. There are two main research methods, namely qualitative and quantitative. Another method involves combining these two, and it is called mixed methods. The qualitative research deals with data in form of text. It can be collected through one-on-one unstructured interviews. It can be in-person interviews, one-on-one. It can be collected through observation or focus group discussion. Qualitative research has different approaches. For example, case study, narrative, ethnography, phenomenology, and grounded theory. Sometimes one can combine 2 or 3 of these approaches, and that is called multiple methods. One important advantage of qualitative research is that it produces rich and comprehensive data. It is, however, its disadvantage is that qualitative research makes it easier or leaves a lot of room for the researcher's biases to get in the way of data analysis, and that can influence the results. So that's a weakness. On the other hand, quantitative research is inspired by positivism, which seeks empirical evidence to support any claim. Examples of quantitative data include nominal or categorical data, which may have numbers assigned to categories, but the numbers do not mean anything. So the numbers do not show any significance. I think a good example is maybe gender. So female and male. You can assign 1 to represent a female and maybe 0 to represent male. But doesn't mean that the numbers mean that one is the first and the other one is second. No, but it's just numbers that are assigned to represent a category or a name, but they do not indicate or imply that there is any difference, or rather something is better or right than the other, or is bigger than the other. No. Another form of quantitative data is ordinal data. Ordinal data is like ordered data, which can be collected using different methods, including, for example, Likert scale, where you have numbers assigned to different kinds of responses in order to determine the degree to which people agree with something. So it could be maybe 1 standing for strongly disagree, and on the other extreme you may have 5 standing for strongly agree. and then you have other numbers in between. But that kind of 5-point scale would be a Likert scale that can enable you to generate ordinal data. It's just data which is ordered. The third form of quantitative data is interval data, and the fourth one is ratio data. The difference between the two is that in interval data, 0 is not an absolute value. So when you have 0, it does not mean there is nothing. While in ratio data, when you have a 0, it is an absolute value. It means there is nothing. But both of these forms of quantitative data, the ratio and interval, they show the quantity. So they show quantity, and for interval, the quantity can be determined by a limiting factor like a rule or a scale for measuring weight. Those are limiting factors. All right. I think one thing to keep in mind at this point is that interval and ratio data meet certain parameters of a population. For example, the data usually is normal. Interval and ratio data is usually normal, normally distributed, and when you plot on the graph, it actually runs parallel to a bell curve, which is normal distribution. And for that reason, interval and ratio data are also called parametric data, while nominal and ordinal data are called non-parametric data because they do not meet these parameters. And that's very important to keep in mind. Okay, so collection of quantitative data can be done using a wide range of methods, such as surveys. You can use closed-ended questionnaires and experiments in a controlled setting. One disadvantage of a quantitative research is lack of flexibility to focus on themes that may emerge but not initially anticipated. So usually such themes may be important. You may get important insights from such themes, but quantitative methods usually do not allow for that. So that's a weakness. It prevents a researcher from getting to the kernel of the research problem that they are trying to address. So as such, quantitative data is not comprehensive compared to qualitative data. However, one important advantage of quantitative data is that it is easy to analyze and also allows for statistical tests for reliability and generalizability of the findings. This is an advantage, and it is very important. Now, considering that both quantitative and qualitative methods have weaknesses and strengths, sometimes it is important to use mixed methods by starting off with, say, for example, qualitative data, and later use or rather collect quantitative data to test your findings from qualitative data. And you can conduct tests for significance using statistical methods. You can test for validity and also generalizability of your findings. And this is what I am doing in my research. So let me illustrate. To examine my first proposition, I am using the phenomenological approach, and this helps to describe the core phenomenon, in this case the identities of the participants. So that is the past identity and the present identity. I want to be able to describe that. Let me highlight here that it is important to be familiar with different research methods so that you can decide the most appropriate for your study, because different research questions require different research methods. Apart from phenomenological approach, I have also engaged a theoretical frame, and that is social identity theory, to guide me locate relevant themes during coding so that I can describe the past and present identities of the participants from their business itineraries. And this is adequate to test my first proposition. To examine my second and third propositions, I am using grounded theory. You must have noticed that I am using the multiple methods here, since I want to explain the Pentecostal discipleship, how it relates to small firms. There is no need to engage any theoretical frame here. So the data will be allowed to speak on its own. And as a researcher, I must be flexible enough to rely on my data alone to explain the influence of Pentecostal discipleship on small firms without bringing my own thoughts to the data. So by now you can see that on the qualitative part of my research, I am using multiple methods because I've combined the phenomenological approach and also grounded theory to address different sub-problems depending on the nature of those problems. But I think I must also highlight here that when you are using grounded theory, you don't engage any theoretical frame. You let the data speak for itself. So that's an important point to always remember. So when the theory emerges from the data, what I'm going to do is to use a discriminant sample to test it before generating hypotheses, and also creating a survey to collect ordinal data on a Likert scale to test the hypothesis. Here, I will use descriptive statistics to explain distribution and reliability of the data, and inferential statistics to provide evidence for determining generalizability of my proposed theoretical model. The statistical analysis will primarily test the extent to which Pentecostal discipleship accounts for the attributes of identity that influence strategies of entrepreneurs in running small firms. Okay, so basic statistical analysis to be engaged will include there'll be correlation tests, preferably Pearson correlation, and also multiple regression analysis to determine accuracy of the theoretical explanation about the effect of Pentecostal discipleship on entrepreneurship. Also, I will evaluate the significance of Pearson correlation coefficient R using t-test to determine generalizability of the findings of my study. And that's it. So I think now you have an idea about what it takes to do research, to go through the whole process. But I think before we go, let's finish with a recap. As you have seen, the ability to conduct research is important in order to make an original contribution in the academy that can also inform practice in everyday work. The Center for Missiological Studies, CMR, in the School of Intercultural Studies expects PhD students to demonstrate high level of skill in research. And to be successful as a CMR student, you must identify a research problem that is topical, interesting, and relevant to your field and CMR. To do this, you must be curious and imaginative. Once you identify a research problem, the next task is to situate it in an appropriate academic field. You can do this by drawing a literature map of your field, highlighting different debates and picking a debate relevant to your research topic. Then you can critically review the literature further with an inquisitive mind until you discover a gap or a question that has never been addressed, or a question that has been addressed in a way that does not satisfy you. When you identify your research question, design how to address it by breaking it into sub-problems, each with its own hypothesis in case of quantitative research, or propositions in case of qualitative research. Identify areas you need to understand better and do tutorials with experts to help refine your research design. Finally, you need to figure out what methods you will use to identify participants, to collect data, and to analyze it. Two main methods are qualitative and quantitative, but you can combine them to strengthen your research. I thank you so much for your attention. I wish you all the best as you write your final papers. God bless you.